So today we're talking tropical paradise, SEOs, podcasting, and how to grow your business organically. So take a listen at today's episode.
Hello, darling. Welcome to Business Building by Design. Do you want increased sales and to scale your small business to a new level? Do you find yourself up late at night worrying about how to make more money and customer retention? Do you wake up with big ambitious goals only to feel frustrated and like you're spinning your wheels and it's not getting anywhere? Well, hello, I'm Emily and I'm here to help. I too have felt frustrated and like I was running in circles only to be right back where I started. I wanted to create more income, have a successful, sustainable business that I could count on without feeling like I was working myself to death. I thought, there has to be a better way. I've learned the secret sauce to growing your small business, and I'm thrilled to share it with you. In this podcast, you'll find tips for attracting new customers, strategies for achieving your financial goals, and connecting with other women entrepreneurs just like you. So put on your walking shoes or grab that kombucha and let's go.
So today I talk with Juliana Barbati. Juliana is a dynamic podcast strategist, consultant, and owner of a top boutique podcast production agency. With a sharp focus on marketing, SEO, copywriting, and monetization, Juliana helps entrepreneurs amplify their voices and share their world-changing messages with the world. But Juliana's passion goes beyond business. As a born-again Christian, she is deeply passionate about the Bible and her faith in Jesus. And in her free time, Juliana enjoys spending time in her tropical Central American paradise with her husband, two homeschooled littles, and their ever-expanding brood of cats. So today we're going to take a listen with Juliana and see about her world, her story, what she's doing to help change lives. So good morning, Juliana. How are you?
I am great. How are you?
Good. I'm so glad that you're here with me today. And I know you probably always have beautiful weather.
Pretty much. I mean, it's hot and beautiful, or
Yes,
but
yes.
it's always amazing.
Well, here we've been going back and forth from freezing weather to tornado weather. Today it's going to be 80. So we had straight line winds last week and tornadoes. So it's been wild here. So
Oh my goodness.
wild. Yeah. This weekend we had no power for a day and a half. So it was really crazy. So anyway, so I want you to introduce yourself. And again, I'm so happy you're here and what you're going to share with us today. So introduce yourself and kind of tell us a little bit of your background, what your story is, how you got to where you are. And then we'll go from there.
All right, great. Well, thank you for having me again, Emily. So yeah, my name is Juliana Barbati, and I currently live in Central America. We moved here about 8 months ago. And, I guess a little bit of my personal background. I was born and raised in Brazil up until I was 13 years old. And then I moved to the US, where I lived most of my life. I have lived in other countries in the world, but mostly in the United States. And we just, like I said, recently moved here. My entrepreneurial journey started when I was pregnant with my daughter. I really wanted to find out a way to stay home because my husband and I had this plan that no matter what, I was going to stay home with the babies. But, we were so broke back then that I really needed to find a way to make money from home. And back then, what I wanted to do, I really wanted to be a YouTuber, an influencer, talk about my favorite baby items and things like that. But the idea never really took off. I mean, I tried some videos, but it was just like not my thing. And then my husband at that time, he had like a full-time job, but he was also trying to grow his photography business. And then fast forward, we're trying to really understand this online space, right? Because we're just back 2015, 2018. We're really trying to really starting actually to understand the power of online marketing and all those things. So then in 2018, my husband and I started on an Amazon store. And that store, 2 years later, broke 6 figures. We actually went into it thinking we're going to be rich overnight, and my husband quit his job, which it was a terrible idea, but, we grew from that. And then, meanwhile, in the back end of it all, I was holding on to that idea. I'm going to be an influencer of some sort. And I was trying to do non-toxic living content on YouTube and things like that. And then, I was like, I really cannot do this anymore. It just took so much time and effort. And I was always so conscious about everything on video. So I paused, the whole thing for a while, but I continued to study online marketing and all of those things because I really, really, really loved it. And then fast forward to 2020, we're all home staring at the walls, right? So then I decided that I was going to start an Etsy shop. And that Etsy shop again took off really quickly. I made 5 figures within like 6 months or so. So I was really, grasping all of the things about online marketing, And then in May of 2020, I actually started podcasting. So in the beginning of my podcast journey, I was really talking about, to the e-commerce seller, right? Like to the mom like me who wanted to make money from home and didn't know how. And I was talking about that. And I feel like I kind of had an advantage because everybody else was talking about, like more general line marketing. I was very niched in talking about e-commerce. But then came a point in around December 2021 that I was like staring at the ceiling thinking, I have said everything there's to say about Etsy. Somebody could literally listen to my episodes and have a successful store. And I was just like done with it. Mm-hmm. I loved, what I did. I was just like, I cannot talk about this anymore. So then I was thinking, okay, if I'm going to pivot, what else can I do? Because I need to make money. By this time, my husband had quit his job back in 2018 when we had the Amazon store. But there was this idea that, if I'm going to make this work, I still need to make money, right? Like I was making money with my Etsy business. I still needed to continue to make money because we counted on that money that I was making online. So, I started to think and I was like, I'm a successful podcaster. I literally grew my business because of podcasts, because prior to 2020, I had tried YouTube, I had tried Instagram, all of those things, and nothing had worked up until I had tried podcasting, and that worked. Mm-hmm. So I was like, you know what? I know the struggles that podcasters go through to grow their businesses. So I'm going to start a podcast management agency. And that's what I did. So around December of 2021, that's when I decided that I was going to make the shift. But I was really at that time, I was trying to balance both, right? I was trying to balance the e-commerce side of me because I was afraid to let go. I was making money from it and trying to balance this new podcast management agency. So I actually kept the agency secret for about 4 months. Mm-hmm. But the agency was growing. Like I was getting clients, just from word of mouth, despite the fact I had the speakeasy business. And then when March 2022 came, I was like, listen, I can't do this anymore. It's really hard for you to struggle or to juggle two businesses that are, they're not even complementary. I really need to go all in with the podcast management agency. And that's what I did. I made the pivot in March. It was, I make it sound like it was just easy. Like one day I just woke up, but through those 4 months, I was really struggling. Yes. What am I going to do? What am I going to say? What are people going to think? And all of those things. But I made the pivot in officially March of 2022, and that business actually made a little bit over 100K in the first year, which obviously blew my mind. It was not anything I went in expecting all of that, but it was just that was the journey. So like now, I'm still helping podcasters. I still have a podcast, and I still have the podcasters, whether they want to launch or they have a podcast and they're like, just handle it for me. I help them with that. And I also offer coaching. Mm-hmm. So that's where I am in the journey right now.
Well, that's awesome. Well, that's such a wonderful story. And just like you said, how you organically, you weren't even advertising or didn't even have things out there and people were just coming to you anyway. So to me, word of mouth is the best advertisement, the best marketing tool that you could ever have. And I try to, when I talk to and coach my clients, they ask me, what's the best way to market? Should I do Facebook, Instagram, billboards, things like that? And I'm like, your best marketing tool is going to be your relationships, your connections with people. And they're going to be your best marketing tool ever.
100%.
Yes. Yes. So, okay. So you have the podcast, Organic Marketing Simplified, and you teach people how to grow their business organically through podcasting. But first off, tell us, can anybody have a podcast?
I would say the most people can have a podcast. Obviously, let's say if your passion is cooking and you're going to teach people how to cook, I think it'll be really hard for you to do something like so visual, right? On a podcast, like grab your garlic. Listen, it's probably possible, but I think it would be more challenging, right? Yes. To podcast like that. I would say for the majority of people though, podcasting could work for them.
Good.
Like, for example, like let's say if I was talking to somebody who had an Etsy shop, right? Like how could somebody with an Etsy shop market their business with a podcast? And let's say they sold, I don't know, I'm looking here at my journals. Let's say they sold journals online. They wouldn't have a podcast about my journal. They would have a podcast about how journaling can help you and other mindset things and other growth tools and things like that. And then in the podcast pitch their shop, pitch the journal that they sell, but there are creative ways. It really depends on what it is that you're selling at the end of the day and your ultimate goals. But podcasting can, work for so many different people.
Well, I think that you touched on it earlier, but having that niche, that fine tuning, knowing specifically who your market is, who you're speaking to, and what their needs are. That's the biggest thing. And I think a lot of people go into podcasting, and I did the same thing. I'm going in thinking, oh, I'm going to talk about everything in my life. I'm going to talk about design work, our remodels. I'm going to talk about this, and this. But you don't realize until you get into it, you're like, I've got to really niche down and find who my client is. So talk a little bit about that, how you came to that.
Yes. So obviously, if you talk about everything and you try to put it in a podcast, you're really not going to grow unless you are somebody who, let's say, you have a huge following online, you are kind of a celebrity of some sort, you can come and have a podcast and talk about whatever. If you want to grow your business using a podcast, you have to be very nailed in what it is that you're going to talk about. Now, does that mean that I don't infuse other things about my personal life in my podcast? Sure. No, absolutely not. I still infuse, like, for example, last November, I became Christian. So I talked about my journey, how it all happened. So I talk about that journey and I bring back, because now Christ has become such an important piece of my life and my business, including my business, I talk about that too. So I bring in my personality and, you'll hear my kids playing the background, yes, I'm a mom, my kids are going to make noise and you're going to hear them in my podcast, giggling or screaming or whatever. So I bring in my personality, but I'm not, here talking about meal planning, right? Like, even though I'm passionate about getting organized and meal planning and decluttering and minimalism, it doesn't help my person right now. Like, she's coming to me because she has, she's struggling to grow her business. So, for example, my ideal listener, she's somebody who has bought the courses, she has read the books, she has listened to the podcasts, but still, she feels like she's 3 feet away from gold, but she can't really understand, like, what is it that's keeping me from actually, like, finding the gold, so I help her do that, so yeah, you have to be very nailed in the things that you're going to talk about and be specific. And I think, in the beginning, you have to be super focused, and as you grow, you can start to infuse things, right? Like, I wouldn't talk about, I don't know, personal things in the very, very first episode, because people don't know who I am. I still had to prove to people that, like, hey, I have something worth listening to, so don't go off on tangents talking about random things in the beginning, because people just don't care.
Yeah. I totally agree. And I feel like I'm bad about that because I'm so ADHD. I typically, I have to really try to make myself focus. And I'm thinking, okay, what did I tell my listeners that I was going to speak on this week? So anyway, but in true, like you said, you became Christian or the follower of Jesus Christ last year. That's awesome, by the way. I love it. And, you just automatically, that becomes your personality, the things in your life, just like your children. And I think that it makes us feel real to our listeners, so they can associate with us, they can relate to us. And you don't want to be just like type A, business. Listeners like to know a little bit about you and like to know your personal history. So anyway, but again, I'll get off on tangents, so don't let me. So tell me this. What do you think if somebody wanted to get started in podcasting, what are the basics of podcasting? Like, how could you help your listener get started?
Okay, so I actually have 5 strategies. And again, like, I've been podcasting for almost 3 years. So I'm not just looking at my podcast and my experience. I'm looking, because I have so much data, because I have so many clients. I really can tell you what works, what doesn't work, because I know, because I have all this data that I can look at. So the first thing that you need to understand is SEO. So anybody who has an online business, you really need to understand what SEO is. And SEO, if you don't know, super high level, it means that you're optimizing your content so it gets found online, meaning, you know, if you had a brick and mortar store, you would tell people specifically where your store is, right? Like an address, here's where you can find it. You wouldn't be cute, we're behind the oak tree by, the Central Park. Like, no, you wouldn't tell. And online, what happens is we are very cute with our names, with the titles that we put in our podcast episodes, how we label our blogs and our YouTube content. And that does nothing for you, get to nowhere, right? So SEO, you have to be very, almost kind of think like a robot and not be creative and to the point, and make sure that you're finding keywords that are very specific that people are looking online. So taking the time to do keyword research. And I feel like people feel maybe jaded about SEO because in the beginning, I feel like it was something that only geeks understood.
Yeah.
But actually, it's not that hard.
No.
I promise you, it's very, very simple. You just have to think, okay, my ideal person, like, what is she going on Google right now? What is she searching for, or he, and start there. And now that can become the basis for your keyword research. So yeah, SEO is going to be super important for the growth of your podcast. Another thing is that you want to show up regularly. So don't be one of those people that, 1 week you podcast and maybe you keep it up for like 4 weeks and then you're like, I'm busy. And then you give up or whatever. Like, people are making it, you're part of their daily routine, right? Like, I think for the most people listening here, you're listening right now, you're either walking, you're drinking your coffee, you're doing your laundry, you're doing something right now, and we're part of your daily routine right now. So when you don't keep your commitment with your listeners, why would they keep coming back to you? So make sure that you're coming back regularly. So if that means that you're podcasting once a week, that's fine, but commit to it and show up, because that's how you're building the trust with the people. You're actually showing up, and it brings me to my next point, which keep your episodes on the shorter side. So episodes that are around 15 minutes long, they're the sweet spot because people are listening to them from beginning to end. It's like a low commitment versus a podcast that's like an hour long. Now, does that mean you could not have a longer podcast? No, but it's a bigger commitment, right? Like when I'm scrolling through the podcast app and I see an episode that's an hour long, I know it's going to take me a couple of days to listen to the podcast, So if you can keep your episodes around 15 minutes, that's great, Another thing too is that you don't have to talk about everything inside of the one episode. You can have a series and be very micro-focused on the episodes you're putting out. Don't give everybody, the whole shebang because it gets confusing. People feel paralyzed. So it's okay for you to be super micro-focused whenever you put out a piece of content. The next thing that is super important for growth are reviews. So Apple will tell you that reviews don't really do anything, but that's not true. I can see that my clients who have more reviews, they have more visibility. Another thing to think about is that if you are on Instagram, like somebody can tell how legit you are, right, in air quotes, by how many followers you have, right? Like it just is what it is. Vanity metrics. People are looking at how many followers you have, or same thing on YouTube, right? How many subscribers. On a podcast, nobody knows, right? Like nobody knows your download numbers or anything. The only thing that's visible is how many reviews you have on Apple. So make sure that you're getting those reviews on Apple. Super important because that will help you get more visibility and more credibility.
Gotcha.
And finally, in the beginning of all of this, when I told you I have a lot of data to look at and I got excited, I love data. I love data because data doesn't lie. The numbers don't lie. So don't just start podcasting and go off of inspiration. Actually look at the data, take a look at last month. What are the episodes that did well? Dissect them. How long were they? What were the keywords? What was I talking about in those episodes? And really become a scientist and dissect why those episodes did well before you go off and you start creating episodes that are, out of inspiration. Listen, sometimes I get inspired and I create episodes, but not 100% of my episodes are just coming out of inspiration. I'm actually looking at the data and giving my listeners what they want to listen to. So make sure that you're looking at the data, and that and don't be afraid. Like, I think in the beginning, if we're being super honest, if you're a new podcaster, you're not going to have a whole lot of data to look at for the first 3 months. And that's okay. That's the time for you to experiment and see what works and see what you like, see what's landing with your audience. But then after that, you're going to have, those 3 months worth of podcasts episodes, and you can look at that and you can start to see a trend. And the more you do data research, I have a date on my calendar every single month that I look back on the episodes prior, and I'm seeing what are the trends. Why did this episode not do well? Like, I put my heart and soul into this episode. Like, why did it not work? So, and be very detached too, because it's just numbers that you're looking at. There's it's not your self-worth. It's nothing like that. But the data, it will be an amazing tool for you to actually expedite your growth in this podcasting space.
Yeah. It's so funny that you say that, because I know I've been doing podcasting I'm almost right at a year. So, and one of my best episodes, it's gotten thousands of downloads, or right at 2,000 downloads. And it was on a hiking trip that I did with my daddy, but I related it to business, but it's the best out there. And it was just he and I, and how we took our hiking trip, and I related it to the difficulties and the struggles and hiking and camping and stuff, and related it to a business, and it's done the best. It's crazy. So yeah, go back and look and see what people like, because I know I'm definitely doing that again. We do a hiking trip every year. So I know that that's definitely on my calendar to do that one again, because I think people really resonated with it.
Yeah, 100%. And I can tell you from my experience in my podcast, people love when I can paint a real life picture for them to understand. Like, when I use the example of, if you had a brick and mortar, you wouldn't say you're behind the oak tree.
Right.
It helps them understand, like, oh, this is why SEO is important. Because if I'm not keywording my things properly,
sure,
it's not going to get found, So when I paint the picture, people can understand it. They're like, oh yeah, that's why. So it's important to bring storytelling into your episodes, and don't just make them about 3 steps to this and walk away. Be human in your episodes.
One more question. Do I need a large following to monetize my podcast?
Absolutely not. So when I started podcasting in May of 2020, I was not pitching anything on my podcast up until August. So I started in May of 2020, and in August, I got my first client. The only thing that changed is that I started pitching in August. So I started pitching in August, and I got a client. Had I started pitching earlier, would I have gotten a client sooner? Probably. So you can start monetizing from day one. Pitch what you do. Talk about, and if you don't have a something yet that you're selling, sell them the free thing, which is your email list, right? Like, create a very amazing freebie that you can send people to, and sell them on the free thing. Yes. Meanwhile, you're getting them inside of a Facebook group or your email list or something, but always sell something to your audience, and don't feel bad about selling, because you're putting out free content.
Absolutely.
So it's okay for you to talk about the thing that you do, so absolutely, you can monetize with a small audience. I don't have a huge audience. I'm not a household name. People don't know who I am, and I'm still making money from my podcast. My podcast is a huge lead generator for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'm glad I found you. But I think too that I've got a course coming out. It's going to launch probably May 1st. And that's one of my key things in the course is we're talking about clients and how to get clients and customers. But also, one of the key components is nourishing the ones that you have, the followers that I have. Even if you only have 10 people listening to your podcast, that's 10 people that are listening to you weekly, So nourish those relationships, grow those relationships, and focus on what you have. Because when you focus on what you have, then more things come and they just generate organically.
Yeah, 100%. And you bring up a good point that I want to expand on, which is podcasting is not a get rich quick scheme. It'll take time, right? So don't think you're going to podcast, for 3 months and then everything's going to change for you. It could, but realistically, you're going to need to podcast for about a year for you to kind of really see growth. Now, here's the thing. Your podcast episode will work for you the day it goes live, but also for years to come. So it doesn't go to waste, if you're keywording everything properly, right? Like you really have to take those keywords into consideration because then people can find you later on. But a podcast will absolutely work for you, but you got to give it time. So don't feel like, I don't want people to leave here thinking, oh, this is it. This is my golden ticket. No, you still have to work hard. The difference between podcasting and other things is that podcasting has a longevity that other platforms don't, right? So like you could spend time on Reels and TikToks and whatever the cool kids are doing these days. But those things are going to die down eventually, right? Like, let's just be generous here. Let's say that a reel can live on for a week, right? A podcast will live on forever.
Exactly.
And the reel will work for you if you're lucky. That reel will work for you for a week. And that's us being generous here, but the podcast will work for you for years to come, literally. For as long as you have a podcast, the podcast will work for you.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And that's one thing I've moved away from social media because I was pouring all my time and energy into it and it wasn't getting, I guess it wasn't getting what I wanted out of it. And I felt exhausted. It exhausts me. So I've totally gone away from that. We have our Facebook page and our group, and I have my groups for my courses, but Instagram, we've really quit using Instagram. And then, like I said, we really honed in this time to just focusing on our groups, just focusing and nourishing those clients. Like I said, taking care of the people that look to us weekly and get our email list. They're on our email list, nourishing those relationships and moving away from just the hustle and bustle of the Instagram and other reels and carousels and acting for other people. I don't want to do that.
Right. Yes, exactly.
So
yeah, I mean, and realistically, when you look at, like, let's say if you're creating a reel or a carousel or something, if you're being honest with yourself, it's taking about 30 minutes, right?
Absolutely.
You could create a podcast episode in 30 minutes or less.
Absolutely.
Like less if we're being honest. Like the more you podcast, the faster you get at it. So you can absolutely record a podcast, like say that'll take you 15 minutes. And then when you're done, just go ahead, write the show notes really quickly. You upload it and you're done.
All right.
And again, like the longevity is there versus the social media. You could put all this effort into it. And listen, it's a moving target.
Yes.
And you're not meant to win in this social media game, if we're being honest. The people who got on it when it was a thing, the people who have a huge following, they do well, right? So the strategies that they share with you works for them. Doesn't work for the person, for the little guy, right? Like you have to put a lot of time and effort that takes away from other things in life, right? So, I have 2 little kids, they're homeschooled. I spend my time working here. I don't want to spend more time trying to grow social media following. So I actually deleted my Instagram back in November. It's really not a place. I mean, I have hated Instagram for the longest time. I used to love Instagram. Like I remember it was 2011 when I got on. And I loved that you just shared your pictures and it was just like such a creative platform. Now it's just become whatever it is that it has become. It's not my thing anymore,
Yeah, I think, and that's okay. That's okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So tell me where people can find you and what you'd like to share.
Yes. So my podcast is called Organic Marketing Simplified. So you can find me wherever you listen to podcasts. If you are interested in learning more about SEO, I actually just created a really amazing resource for finding keywords. And it was like such a God-led experience because I was laying in bed one day, just kind of not even thinking about work. And this idea came through and I knew it was like the Holy Spirit. So you can come check that out too. And yeah, my podcast is really the only place unless you want to email me because I'm not on social media.
Yeah, that sounds great. That's great. I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. And I know I've made notes and I'll put these in the show notes as well. And also where people can find you. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay, so some takeaways today from our show. First off, thank you, Juliana, for coming on the show. And I so enjoyed talking to you. And I am so jealous because of where you live and that you've got such wonderful weather. But I really enjoyed talking with her, and I hope you had some great takeaways from today's show. But the first thing is anybody can do a podcast. Anybody can monetize a podcast. But you really want to be specific on who your target audience is. So that's the next thing. Know your market. Know who it is that you're speaking to. Know who it is that you're selling to. Know who it is that you are servicing. Make sure that you have your niche, know your market, and what it is that they're requiring. What's their problem that you can fix? Next, incorporate what you love and know. Just like Juliana and I talked about, it's really important to get on a personal level with our listeners because that's how we bond. That's how we resonate with each other. We have common similarities, or we have common goals in life, or we may just do the same thing. We may be fellow podcasters or fellow entrepreneurs, but incorporate what you know and what you love, because that's when you're genuine, when you do the things that you know and love. Lastly, be focused and specific. Make sure you're focused in and honed in on your customer and your target market. Make sure that it is that you know who you're speaking to so that you are able to address their issues. You're able to share their successes and their joys, but be specific and focused with your audience or whoever your target market is. Again, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.